Hi, my name is Mike. I'm one of the pastors here at Kings Harbor, and thank you so much for utilizing this resource. Our hope for you in anything that we provide is that you would expect transformation, that we could demonstrate love towards you because of the love of God demonstrated to us, that you would have the faith stirred in you to deal with obstacles and to see opportunities, and that ultimately that the kingdom of God would be revealed in every area of your life. And so our hope with this resource is that the Lord would speak to you powerfully. We're entering into the final days of our presidential election and all the subsequent elections around it. And we just thought, man, it would be really faithful in this season to help navigate that and develop language for us in that. And a lot of times when we have that conversation where we end is, well, regardless of where we end up, we want to be unified. But last week we started with, well, actually the reality is because of Jesus, we start in unity, even if we end up voting differently. And so I want to be careful here because I think especially with my personality, and I don't talk about politics often, there's probably this desire and assumption to be like, yeah, tell me what direction we're going to go. Tell me what I should vote for, how I should think. And so what I don't want to do is I don't want to disappoint you because we have unmet expectations. In fact, John C. Maxwell, I don't know when John Maxwell started putting the C in his name, and I'm like, so people, I don't know if there's another John Maxwell that he's rivaling with, but John C. Maxwell has this quote: "Disappointment is the gap between expectation and reality." And you know this to be true, right? Like when you go to Costco or Sam's and you see the packaging and whatever you're buying looks like it is the most gourmet design, put together, largest portion, and then you'll see in the really small print that you can't read unless you borrow somebody else's magnifying glass, and it says, "This is not a representation of the real size of this product." The reason they put that on there is so that way you don't call their customer service number and say, "I was expecting a burger that was supposed to be as big as my head, but it's actually smaller than my two fingers put together." They're trying to manage your expectations, and so there is no disappointment. And so in the same way, hey, I want to manage your expectations so there is no disappointment. If you came today to figure out how Mike is going to fill out his ballot, that's actually probably not going to be all that helpful for you. I'm not going to fulfill that expectation. My hope is what we just sang, and if you're watching this later on and you didn't get to see the worship portion of our service, we just sang a song called "All Hail King Jesus," that the beauty, the renown, that the matchlessness of Jesus would attract our attention and cast our eyes up, even in this season when we are by duty and by grace having the opportunity to look at something a little less glorious than him. And so with that in mind, this morning, we're going to enter into 1 Samuel chapter 8. And we're going to see this desire for a king and the way that the Lord and his prophet Samuel responds to it. So here's the main idea. Government is given by God for the good of people. Like I don't want to miss that this morning. That structures and systems of government are something that God devised. Romans chapter 13, it would talk about that we should submit to all authorities because these authorities have been given by God. And in fact, if you're doing good, you should not even be intimidated by these authorities. And so I don't want to miss that they are both given by God and meant to be for our good. But the reality is that they are often disappointing. Read that word often as always. Don't place expectations on human leaders that only God can do. And so here's where I want to wrestle. I want to take the first few verses and just look at this challenge of succession planning. And then in verses 6 through 9, I want to see this sovereign empathy. And then in verses 10 through 18, I just want to give you a small product disclaimer. And then we'll end with eyes wide open in verses 19 through 22. I already prayed, so I just want to jump into the text with expediency this morning. We got a lot of ground to cover. 1 Samuel chapter 8, starting in verse 1, would say this. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges over Israel. His firstborn son's name was Joel, and his second son was Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. However, his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned towards dishonest profit, took bribes, and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and went to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Therefore, appoint a king to to judge us the same as all the other nations have. So as we read this, obviously we're dropping into the latter, or at least a story that's already in motion. And maybe that creates some questions that we probably need to wrestle with to kind of understand what's going on. I think the first question that you would even see in this text is you're hearing about Samuel. If you're not aware of who Samuel is basically the preeminent voice of God in that day, both as a judge and as a prophet. And so the prophet side of it, you probably understand, speaking to the people on behalf of God to give them direction, to give them correction. But then this idea of a judge, what is a judge? Now, if I said, you're going to see on the screen in just a moment the definition of that, and the question will be, who were the judges? And if you're like Judge Judy, Judge Joe Brown, you watch too much daytime TV is the problem. But who are these judges? Who are they meant to be? And so a great definition from the Logos Fact Book would say this: a person who dispensed justice and punished evil with political, military, and spiritual authority. And so there's two parts to what they did. There was a part of it that they just kind of maintained order. They just made sure that disputes were settled in an equitable way, that they were making sure that the justice in their society was both fair, balanced, and present for people. But then there was also a role outside of the people that they operated, that when there was a threat or a danger, they often were the ones to lead the military. And so the book of Judges is literally about this office, these people. It's a derivative of what Moses was doing, derivative of what Joshua would ultimately do. And it's almost a combination of the two. And as they went forward, this is how they were meant to lead. The problem is, if you ever read the book of Judges, you're like, this just keeps getting worse. I wanted at one point to going into this year, knowing it was going to be a political election year, to walk through the book of Judges with you. But it is 19 chapters that just keeps getting more and more brutal. By the time we got to the end of the book, I wouldn't want to come to church anymore. And so we're going to skip through the 19 chapters and 24 verses of brutality, and we're just going to go to verse 25. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did whatever seemed right to him. And so at the end of the book, the structure that God's put in place, the indictment of the structure is, and yet there is nobody to rule. Nobody was authoritative enough and strong enough to rule, and so everybody's wilding out up in here. That's not what your version of the Bible says. It just says, did what was right in their own eyes. And so there's this sense of, this isn't working. And then to take it a step farther, in general, it's not working. But not only is it not working in general, but it's not working in specific, because Joel and Abijah just aren't getting the job done. So much so that the elders, the leaders of the tribes, come to Samuel and say, hey man, we're going to have a conversation. First of all, you old. I'm just going to say on behalf of everybody who's middle-aged in here, if you walk up to me and start with how gray my beard's getting, we got a problem. And so they first say to him, you're old, but second of all, your sons are awful. And it's unique because if you read the history of the judges, this is a unique moment that these kids are even in office. Because this wasn't a hereditary throne. In fact, as you read through the book of Judges, it's actually a little bit depressing, because God will raise up this person to deliver God's people, and then it would say at the end of their time that they did such and such for 40 years and they died. The first message that I ever got to preach to you on staff here was on an Easter Sunday morning, and I talked about that the resurrection of Jesus cancels that statement, because he's the only one that dies and comes back, and everybody else fails in their sin and they ultimately die. And so over and over again, so-and-so dies and God will raise up another person, and so-and-so dies and God will raise up another person. And the only judge that we see that is not somebody that is raised up because God chooses somebody else is a man named Abimelech. Abimelech is the son of Gideon. Gideon had 71 sons. Man, Father's Day had to be awesome. Birthdays had to be awful. And so Abimelech was actually the son of one of the concubines that in Shechem that Gideon had been with. And he plots a plan to get military backing behind him, goes and kills his other 70 brothers, or really 69 brothers because one stays living, so that way he can take over the throne. So he's the only person that gets passed from father to son, And just the circumstances in which he usurped it is like, man, this is not a good picture. And so this is abnormal that Samuel would just pass it to his boys. That's not how this works. God raises up, not somebody's hereditary selection. Here's the second thing about this. I already said it. His sons were awful. Literally, if the job is to be just, if the job is to settle things well between people, you taking bribes, you going after dishonest profit, and you perverting justice means you are doing everything but the job description. And so they're not being faithful to the role. They're failing at the role. And these elders come and say, hey, we've got to do something about this. And so therefore, Samuel, you're not going to be here forever. Your sons can't get the job done. Appoint for us a king that will judge us like the other nations. Now, we've been taught, especially if you've read the rest of this text, to feel reflexively negative about that. Like, why do you want to be about the other nations? But this is actually biblical language that they're repeating back to Samuel. Deuteronomy chapter 17. Deuteronomy 17, it's interesting because right before what we're going to read, there's this conversation about why you need judges. When there are particularly difficult cases that you cannot solve, that you would go to the judge and the judge would be giving you the words of the Lord. And so therefore you should heed what he says. And then he says this, starting in verse 14. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, take possession of it, live in it, and say, I will set a king over me like the nations around me. You are to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. Appoint a king from your brothers. You are not to set a foreigner over you or one who is not your people. However, he must not acquire many horses for himself or send the people back to Egypt to acquire many horses. For the Lord has told you, you are never to go back that way again. He must not acquire many wives for himself so that his heart won't go astray. He mustn't acquire very large amounts of silver and gold for himself. When he is seated on his royal throne, he is to write a copy of this instruction for himself on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priest. It is to remain with him, and he is to read from it all the days of his life so that he may learn to fear the Lord his God and to observe all the words of this instruction and to do these statutes. Then his heart will not be exalted above his countrymen. He will not turn from this command to the right or to the left, and he and his sons will continue reigning many years in Israel. And so what they're asking for is actually a good thing. What they're actually asking for is, okay, God, you said when we get into the land that you've given us, we're here, like and this is not working. This system of government seems to be broken. These judges aren't getting it done. There's no king, and it seems like a king would bring order. And in fact, you told us to do this. And so would you give us that type of king? And I just want to make it really clear. The reason that they're demanding something different is the failed character of the leaders that are right in front of them. Character matters. It doesn't matter if you just read a couple of chapters back. They're actually at a good moment here. They've got the Ark of the Covenant back. They're seeing success through Samuel. Like things are going well for them. And so maybe let me say it this way. Policy is good, but character's broken. And we should not just exalt, well, we got more money in our paychecks, therefore things are good, if the character of the person leading us isn't faithful to the Lord. And so I said it this way. Failed character in our leaders should bother us and cause us to demand change. If the text ended there, it feels like it would be pretty clear and straightforward. But verse 6 says this. When they said, give us a king to judge us, Samuel considered their demand wrong, so he prayed to the Lord. But the Lord told him, listen to the people and everything they say to you. They've not rejected you. They've rejected me as their king. They are doing the same thing to you that they have done to me, since the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, abandoning me and worshiping other gods. Listen to them, but solemnly warn them and tell them about the customary rights of the king who will reign over them. And why is the Lord expressing rejection here? Like, literally, they're like, we want a king to judge over us, or let me say it another way, Samuel, we need somebody else to do your job. And so I could see why Samuel would feel some kind of way about this. But God is God. But it seems like the way that they're thinking about what's going on is like, we need someone tangible. And later on, they're going to say in the text, we need someone to go out before us in battle. We need someone to preserve justice for us, to protect us. And I just got to imagine that God's like, were you not there in chapter 6 and chapter 7? Were you not there when I was going out and giving you victory and leading you and protecting you and doing all of those things? Did you miss all of those things? That somehow you want something else other than me to be what only I can be for you. So he says, well, warn them. But I want you to read the words carefully that he says. Solemnly warn them and tell them about the customary rights of the king. So he's not saying this as if what the king is doing is unjust or wrong or sinful. He's like, he actually has a right to do this. This is what you're signing up for. So Samuel, and I'm sure Samuel's like, I'm about to let them know for sure. Samuel told, verse 10, all the Lord's words to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, these are the rights of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and put them to his use in his chariots, on his horses, or running in front of his chariots. He can appoint them for his use as commanders of thousands or commanders of fifties, to plow his ground and reap his harvest, or to make his weapons of war and the equipment for his chariots. He can take your daughters to become perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He can take your best fields, vineyards, and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He can take 1/10 of your grain and your vineyards and give them to his officials and servants. He can take your male servants, your female servants, your best cattle, and your donkeys and use them for his work. He can take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves can become his servants. When that day comes, you will cry out, because the king you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord won't answer you on that day. Now hear what he says. When you read the scriptures, anytime you see anything in repetition close to itself, it's meant for emphasis. When something's said over and over and over again in close proximity, it's meant to grab your attention and say, hey, that thing is important. And here's what the thing in that few verses is important. He will take. Over and over again, he will take your best young men. He'll take your best young women. He'll take your servants. He'll take your flock. He'll take your cattle. He'll take your land. And you need to know that elders in that day, part of the requirement for being an elder is that you had to be a landowner. So now he's hitting home. This isn't just for the common people. This hits you. You with the best land, and you don't get to pick. He takes what he wants to take. But this is what you're signing up for. And then you see the words that Samuel uses very carefully. The king that you will choose for yourselves. Let's rewind back to Deuteronomy, because in Deuteronomy, the text would say, and you are to appoint over you the king that the Lord chooses. And so now there seems to be a discrepancy between their desires and the Lord's desires. He says, if you get what you want, just know what you're signing up for. That's true of us in our political system. Sometimes we need to be reminded that that's true of us in just our personal lives with our sin. You get what you sign up for. Not only is he trying to warn them, he's trying to make very clear for them, you seem to be dislodging the Lord's place in your life because of what you want from this human king. Then verse 19 would say this. The people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we must have a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations. Our king will judge us, go out before us, and fight our battles. Samuel listened to all the people's words and then repeated them to the Lord. Listen to them, the Lord said to Samuel. Appoint a king for them. Then Samuel told the men of Israel, each of you go back to your city. And that language of we must have a king over us. We want to be like the other nations. Man, my understanding of the way that the Lord ordained Israel was that they were meant to be a light to the nations that was different than the nations. And something in them had shifted and said, well, here's what good for us is. It's to be like all those around us. You need to know this. I may slip into some other messages here. Tomorrow, I'm preaching a missions class at a church down in Orange County. Earlier this week, I was in Arkansas preaching about the life of Joseph. And so I may just lose where I'm at and start talking about Joseph. Just pretend like it fits into the message. So in the life of Joseph, I was setting you up for that. At the very end of the book, he is second in command in Egypt. His dad, Jacob, has died, and his brothers come to him and say, okay, now if you want retribution, we know dad's gone. Do what you got to do. And the famous verse that we have from that is what the enemy intended for evil, the Lord intended for good. But what he says right before that is actually really enlightening. He says, should I be in the place of God? And then he says, what the enemy intended for evil, the Lord intended for good. If you know anything about the book of Genesis starts with what's good. And the Lord's saying over and over, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good. And there's an author named Christopher Watkins in his book, Biblical Critical Theory, that he talks about that oftentimes the problem with humanity is that we want to sit in God's seat and be him and declare what is good as opposed to bowing down to what he says is good. And so in this moment, they're saying, here's what's good, that we get a human like us to sit in your place and determine what we should do. And this is what grieves the Lord's heart. So what do we do with that? Government is given by God for the good of people, and often, always, disappointing. Don't place expectations on human leaders that only God can do. And so there's an unanswered question in this text. Back early when the Lord's speaking for the first time, he makes a statement that they're doing to me what they've done since the days of Egypt. They're abandoning me and worshiping other gods. What is that? How is that possible? Because I think, and these are not my own thoughts, they're actually developed from a book called Party Crashers, that politics can stir idolatry in us. And so oftentimes the fight that we live in is whether you're right or left, whether you're liberal or conservative, whether you're Democrat or Republican, but I'm going to multiply our angst and I'm going to add some things to the conversation. Because you could be on either side of the ticket and still deal with these idols. And so let me just name the 4 idols for you. The first one is progress. I'm just going to put my cards on the table. This is my idol. I want the world to be better and faster. I love technology. I love the power of medicine. I mean, y'all know I'm impatient. Every time I get on a plane, I'm like, there's got to be some technological advancement that helps us deplane faster than this. And so progress says that we're going to change the world and make it better with all the things that we can come up with. Or a second version of that is responsibility. That if you're responsible and you work hard and you do the things that you're supposed to do, go to the school that you're supposed to go to, live in the community that you're supposed to live in, show up at work and do all the hard work, that if you're responsible, that life should be good. Or maybe it's the idol of identity. That I need to be seen and valued for who I am. And if you're not willing to affirm that and fight for that for others, then somehow you don't understand what justice is. And so whatever it is that is your particular way of wanting to be seen or cause that you want to fight for, it's no longer do we agree or disagree, but do you accept me? And we've elevated that. Or maybe the fourth one is security. That as long as I'm protected and the bad guys stay over there and I stay over here, then the world's going to be okay. Make sure that I'm well protected. The author of the book would say, good fences make good neighbors. And maybe that's the idol that stirs in us. Maybe it's not physical barriers, but maybe it's financial barriers. That if I can have enough money, if I can have enough in my retirement, in my bank account, I'll be safe in case something bad happens. But good luck to everybody else. And those idols are the very things that our political system wants to pick at. Watch a debate. Hear how much of the rhetoric is be worried because somebody's coming for your security. Be worried because they're going to take money out of your account and tax you more. Hear about how much of that rhetoric is that if you elect me, I'm going to make the world better by making sure that we can get from point A to point B faster. Hear how much of the rhetoric is, if this is what matters to you, if this is what you've based your identity on, I'm going to write legislation that upholds that thing. And hear how much of the rhetoric is, well, there's a difference between you and them because you're a responsible, faithful citizen that's doing your civic duty, and they are deplorable. They're pulling on idols, and we've let them do it. And sometimes we've baptized those idols and said that they're good in the name of Jesus. So one of the reasons why I said that it can clearly become an idol is because how many idols were amongst the nations that promised some level of prosperity or security, or that they would say, we want that. They got a ton of gold over there, and so would you give us that same type of security? Literally, he says, hey, don't go back to Egypt because they got horses. We want some better technology. They got some Mustangs over there. We want the Mustangs. For those of you who are not into cars, that was a car joke as a theological joke. So I think that's one of the ways that we can fall into idolatry, as we can look around and say that the world will be good if it's this way. Give me my idol. Here's the second thing. Sin and systems. The integrity of our political system cannot outpace the integrity of our political leaders. You might have a political idol if it's easy for you to ignore the moral flaws of the people that you're voting for. Because our system will never be better than the people that are leading it. Integrity matters. And if we cannot be honest with one another about the integrity of the people that are in front of us, because they satisfy our idols, then we've got an idolatry problem. Like, there is this reality that this is what the scriptures will show us over and over again, that the degeneration of systems. Judges didn't work because judges were sinful humans. The kingship didn't work because the kings were sinful humans. Democracy doesn't work because we're a bunch of sinful humans. And I'm not, again, my main idea here was that government is from God and it's good, but it disappoints us. And part of why it disappoints us is that the system will never be better than the people that run the system. And so this actually should be comforting for you. You're like, wait a minute. Where are the comforting words in those sentences? God didn't hear them. And so again, Christopher Watkins in his book, The Biblical Critical Theory, talks about that oftentimes when people are trying to make you feel better about the world, they don't talk to you about sin. But here's what the reality of sin does. It makes it an equal playing field. And so on November 5th, when I'm thinking about former President Donald Trump or Vice President Kamala Harris, and I'm not looking at them saying they're this unapproachable sinner that when they got in office, power corrupted them, and not looking at myself and saying that if I had that opportunity, I would do the same. And so sin levels the playing field and allows us to not exalt somebody to be more than what they are, but allows us to see them as they are and recognize that there are flaws and ask us to wrestle with those. Our systems will never outpace the integrity of our leaders. And let me end here. I want to right-size our expectations. Because if we overweight our expectations for a human representative to do what only God can do, the distance between our expectation and our reality is going to be disappointing for us. So I wrote it this way. There's a day that is coming when we will receive the progress, responsibility, identity, and security that we desire. It just probably won't be on November 6th. I can tell you what it looks like when it comes, though. Here's the thing. The other day I was on a phone call and somebody was asking me about preaching. And they're like, talk to me about the way that you think through a message. And I'm like, so you want me to think about how I think? Okay. And my hope for you is in any time that I preach, that I'm causing you to lift your eyes up and see the grand story of what God's doing. Maybe a great example, a couple of weekends ago, we had our Harry Bridges work day, and Rafael Rodriguez was one of those that was helping the FCA soccer camp. And I was standing near enough that I could hear him coaching the kids, and he would keep saying to the kids over and over again, look up or you're going to miss the game if you're looking down at your feet. You're going to miss the game if you're looking down at your feet. You're going to miss the game if you're looking down at your feet. And church, I just want to tell you to look up. You're going to miss the kingdom if you're staring at where you're standing in this moment. And so I just want to give you a picture of the kingdom. Revelation 21. You knew this is where we were going. You knew we were going to end up at Revelation. Been a few weeks. We got to get there. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And don't hear that as it's being destroyed, but the gap between them has been closed. They are now one, and the sea was no more. I also saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared like a bride adorned for her husband. Then I heard a loud voice from the throne. Look, God's dwelling is with humanity, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and will be their God. That's your identity. That's who you get to be. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Grief, crying, and pain will be no more because the previous things have passed away. That's your progress. Then the one seated on the throne said, look, I'm making everything new. He also said, write, because these words are faithful and true. And then he said, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will freely give to the thirsty from the spring of the water of life. And so those who are responsibility people are like, well, wait a minute, maybe they're thirsty because they spent their money in the wrong places. He didn't seem to care. The one who conquers will inherit these things. And I will be his God, and he will be my son. Again, that's your identity. But the cowards, the faithless, the detestable, murderers, the sexually immoral, the sorcerers, the idolaters, and all the liars, their share will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. And so hear the responsibility there. For those who are not connected to Jesus and not faithfully following after him, there is going to be accountability and responsibility. Let's drop down to verse 22, not because I'm nervous. I already read to you about lake of fire. I'm not nervous about much. But because it's talking about the measurement of the new city. But verse 22 would say, I did not see a temple in it because the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb are its temple. The city does not need a sun or moon to shine on it because the glory of God illuminates it, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. Its gates will never close by day because it will never be night. That's your security right there. They will bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. Nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but only those written in the Lamb's book of life. There is a day that is coming that the things that we long for will be real. I just don't think you're going to find it on a ballot. And now that takes the pressure off of you to find the right candidate who's going to unlock Shangri-La. There ain't one on the ticket. And so now you get to do your civic duty, not as someone trying to find a human king to do what previous human judges couldn't do, but as someone who says, ultimately, the Lord's going to do this, and he's appointing people to move the story forward. And so, Lord, help me see who's going to faithfully move your story where you want it to go. That's what we get to take part of, brothers and sisters. Let me pray. So, Jesus, lift our eyes that we might see the game. I know that there are some that the way that we're talking about this is creating a level of angst because it feels like we're denying our civic duty or we're denigrating the value of our democracy. And Lord, I pray that that's not what they walk away with. In fact, there's more to the series to come that'll begin to answer some of those questions, but that we would see and understand that both our candidates and our systems are flawed because of sin. And you are the only one that can fix that problem. Would we not fall into the postmodern trap of wanting all the progress, all the responsibility, all the security, all the identity of the kingdom without the king? You are king. Will we not dethrone you for something that makes us more like those around us? Instead, would we continue to lift our eyes up and believe that this moment is leading us to that ultimate moment that we just read about? It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen.
Thanks so much for checking out this message from Kings Harbor. We would love to connect with you. If you go to kingsharbor.org/hello and fill out a short connect card, that allows us the opportunity to follow up with you. Also, if this message has been a blessing to your life, we believe that the Lord wants to rule and reign in every part of who we are. That means our time, our talent, our treasure. And so if this has been a blessing, we would ask that you would consider contributing back to the ministries of Kings Harbor so we can continue to bless and help people in the same way that we hope we have done for you. With that in mind, we want you to know that our heart towards you and our heart towards the world around us is that we want to be a love-forward people. And we're praying that you would join us in that.